If you've ever had to fight for your own corner of the world, what did it teach you, and who did you invite to sit there with you? ChatGPT said. That night, as the parish hall emptied and the snow kept falling, I sat for a moment with my hand resting on Maris's chair. Its leg mended steady again. The wood felt warmer than the air, like it remembered every hand that had leaned on it in trust. I'd learned that sometimes the best way to keep your ground is to share it, turning loss into a place others can stand. Justice isn't always loud. Sometimes it's just the quiet return of what's right. The first thing I noticed was the shine on the doorknob polished to a mirror, the way Tamsin liked things, before I noticed her hand on it barring my way. "It's better if you stay outside until the guests arrive," she said, voice bright as a ribbon. The tone wasn't a suggestion. It had the neat snap of a place card already written. Cold air slipped through the gap between us and carried the smells I'd woken up expecting: sage butter or turkey, somewhere deep in its roasting hour. I could see past her shoulder to my own kitchen, the copper pots that Maris had insisted we keep, even when they tarnished the linen runner my sister sent the year she moved to Arizona. All of it arranged for photographs. I pressed my palm to the jamb, felt the old grain under new paint, and smiled the way you do when a clerk miscounts your change and you decide not to make a fuss. "All right," I said. "I'll get out of your way." She eased the door shut, careful, as if my presence might smudge the glass. On the stoop, frost still clung to the railings in thin scales that left a glitter on my sleeve. Across the street, Eloise Tarrant was coming down her steps with 2 pies stacked in a carrier. Cinnamon and clove curled at me like a hand beckoning. I met her halfway and took the carrier before she could argue. "Your timing is perfect," I said. "I've been promoted to pedestrian." Eloise squinted at the house behind me. "Promoted, is it?" Her gray hair was tucked into a red knit cap, studded with little white puffs that looked like snowballs. "You coming over later?" "Eventually," I said. "Apparently I'm best appreciated at a distance, until everything is picture-ready." She made a sound in her throat that was in agreement. Inside her place, the heat fogged my glasses and set off a quiet ticking in my knees. We slid the pies onto her counter. She wiped her hands and looked at me the way nurses look at charts. "I've never heard of anyone being banned from their own kitchen," she said softly, brows pinching as if the words themselves didn't fit. "It's only temporary," I said, and heard how practiced it sounded. "They're excited. Young people like a good debut." I thanked her for the rescue and stepped back into the cut-glass sunlight. The street had that late November hush cars, packed at odd angles, a child's mitten abandoned on a hood, a flag lifting lazily off a porch post. Rowan crossed the living room window, head down, carrying a stack of plates. Last night he'd paused in my study doorway and let his eyes slide over the top of the file cabinet where the black folder sat. He'd opened his mouth like a man about to walk into cold water, then thought better of it. "We'll talk later," he'd said, barely above a murmur, and retreated. He's always been like that, a good heart with a brake line attached. I let myself in through the side door that sticks in winter unless you lift and pull. The house hummed, heat kicking through old registers, faint radio static, under the clatter of pans. I didn't go to the kitchen. I went to my study. It still smelled faintly of cedar from the drawer liners Maris swore by, and of coffee from a mug I'd forgotten to rinse. The afternoon light came in low and pale, laying a strip of brightness across the desk. The folder was where I'd left it, its clasp catching and releasing with that small, crisp sound I've always liked. Paper has a way of outlasting feelings. It keeps its edge. I slid the right of occupancy agreement out far enough to see the signatures, my name and Rowan's, the date the clause Harlan had insisted on, language no one appreciates until they do. I didn't need to read it. I needed the weight of it. I slipped the folder into the inside pocket of my jacket and patted the spot the way men do when they check for their wallet at a bus stop. From down the hall, Tamsin's laughter airy and bright, and the scrape of a chair leg. "Centerpiece goes there," she said, then sharper, "No there." I stood a moment, feeling the house underneath it all, the original floorboards we couldn't afford to replace in '98, the settling that made the bedroom door stick every August, the faint sweet draft at the baseboard by the front stairs. A home has its own pulse, and if you've lived long enough inside it, you can hear it change. On my way back out, I paused in the foyer to adjust the crooked frame of a photo that never stayed straight. Rowan at 8 gap-toothed, holding a red sled that looked too big for him. My thumb left a small clear arc on the glass, a half moon in the dust. I'd meant to wipe last week. I eased the door open and stepped again into the bright cold. Eloise's screen door creaked. Somewhere a dog barked twice, startled by nothing. I tucked my hands into my pockets and felt the rectangle of the folder settle against my ribs, warm now from my body. You get to a certain age, and you learn the difference between making a scene and making a record. Both can be loud, only one has a future. I watched my breath lift and vanish in front of me, and thought calmly, not unkindly, let's see how far they want to take this. The phone rang while I was stacking logs in the cradle beside the fireplace, resin catching under my thumb. I wiped my hand on my sleeve and picked up. "Evening, Calvin," Harlan said, his voice wearing that polite edge he saves for people on thin ice. I could picture him at his desk, glasses low, one hand resting on a legal pad. "Tell me you still have the original," he said. "I do," I said. "It's not going anywhere." "The reversion clause," he went on, soft as the page of a hymnal, "is rare for a reason. People don't like to imagine they'll need it, but once you need it exactly." Behind his words, I heard the faint scratch of his pen. Behind mine, the radiator took a long breath and hissed it out again. Snow had started to tumble down Main Street in slow, careful flakes. One landed on the outside of my study window, clung for a heartbeat, and ran itself thin. The lamp threw a warm halo over the blotter. Somewhere down the hall, Tamsin's voice rose and fell like someone testing microphones. "Bring it up, Rowan," she said, cheerful as a commercial. "Tonight, not tomorrow." I pinched the bridge of my nose and tried a little humor, the way you toss a coat over a tear in the sofa. "You ever see a train begin by ringing the dinner bell?" "Harlan, trains whistle before they arrive," he said. "Paperwork whistles too." We went through the language line by line, not because I didn't know it, but because repetition tightens the knot. He reminded me about signatures, timestamps, the need to keep the original in my possession at all times. "Copies for everyone," he said. "But the spine stays with you. I hear you." I set the phone to my shoulder and pulled the black folder from my jacket. Its corners neat, the clasp catching with that crisp little click that always satisfies. I laid it on the desk and opened the top drawer. The cedar liner gave up a faint sweetness when it moved. "You okay, old friend?" he asked, voice lowering into the register he used when we were 23, and convinced the world would straighten if we argued hard enough. "I'm fine," I said, annoyed mostly. That's an energy I can measure. From the living room, Rowan Tamsin again brighter. "Now please." His answer was a smudge, a river stone of sound turned in the mouth. I could see him in my mind standing at the threshold, like a man debating which foot to move first. "Keep your temper and your paper," Harlan said. "Let the facts walk themselves to your door." "I intend to." I slid the agreement into the drawer. Felt the metal of the little lock meet itself. The key was cool against my palm, colder than the window glass. I turned it until the mechanism bit. The click was small but complete, like a door deciding to be shut. Rowan's shadow filled the hallway before he did. He leaned into the room, hand on the frame. Eyes doing that sideways swim they do when he wants to be a boy again. "Dad," he began and stopped. Behind him, Tamsin said his name one more time, in that bright public tone she uses for answering machines and brunch menus. He glanced over his shoulder, swallowed, and gave me a look that asked for a kind of pardon I didn't possess the power to grant. "We'll talk later," he said, and backed away. "Harlan," I said. "I'll call you in the morning." "I'll be here," he said. "Lock the drawer." "It's locked." We hung up. The room settled around me. The radiator hissed another long exhale. The lamp hummed. I stood there a moment with my hand still on the key, listening to my house, the way you listen to a sea inside a shell. From upstairs, somewhere beyond the guest room and the old sewing table, a muffled thud landed heavy enough to be furniture, sure as a period at the end of a sentence. May's Diner keeps the lights warm even when the day can't manage it. Monday mid-morning, the doorbell jangled and a hush of cold came with me. A dozen boots were parked along the rubber mat slush, sighing down into its grooves. Harlan was already in the back booth, the one tucked under the framed photograph of the town parade. The booth where we once argued about ethics and inflation and whether either one ever really ends. He didn't stand. He lifted a hand 2 fingers the way a referee signals, "There's going to be a fair game if you let it." "Coffee first," he said. Then to the waitress, 2 please, as if we'd ordered together our entire lives. Steam lifted off the mugs in white curls that looked like breath on a very cold morning. The leather seat had a softened valley where 100 conversations had worn it down. Maple syrup hung in the air with bacon, the great American compromise. "I'm not here to talk anyone into being kind," Harlan said low enough that the forks clinking 3 tables over wouldn't catch a word. "I'm here to talk you into being thorough." "I can do thorough," I said. He slid a yellow legal pad across the table and wrote dates down the left margin, neat mechanical the way he writes, when a case has entered the part of his brain that clicks. From now on, every change gets a photo. Timestamp on location noted. If a door sticks that didn't, if a chair moves that shouldn't, if access shifts from yours to ours, you record it. Don't correct anyone. Don't escalate. Observe and archive. I nodded. The coffee had that diner bite that makes you feel more awake than you are. You think it's going to escalate on its own. I think pressure seeks a crack. I'd rather the crack be in their timeline than your temper. We let that sit. Servers drifted past in a soft choreography. Plates kissing laminate pencils, tapping pads. Snow darkening in dots on the tile and turning to tiny shining puddles. I told him about the chair. Not any chair. Maris's chair. The one with the shallow scuff on its right arm from the year our Christmas tree leaned, and I caught it with an elbow. "It's gone," I said. No discussion, no "what do you think," just gone. He didn't ask how I felt about it. He knows. "Start there," he said. "Photographs of where things were and where they are now. Don't make a speech, make a record. If you can include something that anchors the day, a newspaper on the table, the stove clock, even your wristwatch. Juries believe what cameras believed first." I smiled despite myself. "You should embroider that on a pillow. Pillows don't hold up as evidence." His mouth tweaked. "Phones do." He asked about voices, tones, words chosen and avoided. I mentioned a text thread I'd glimpsed over Rowan's shoulder, Tamsin's bubbles bright and excited about finalizing decor. He made a small note and underlined it once. When he underlines a thing only once, it means he expects it to underline itself later. We paid with cash, the old habit of leaving no trail where none is required, and sat a minute more, not ready to go back out into the white day. "Cal," he said softer, "you keep peace by keeping ground. You're not planting a flag, you're measuring a lot line." Outside, a delivery truck growled past. The bell jangled again, and the cold shook itself out across the tiled floor. I buttoned my coat. Harlan squeezed my shoulder once, the way men do when words would bruise. "Call me tonight," he said. "Call me sooner if the air changes." Main Street had a fresh crust of snow the plows hadn't bothered yet. I walked the 2 blocks home, boots squeaking, breath fogging, passing the barber pole that never stops turning, and the pawnshop window with a trumpet that no one has bought in 5 years. My key stuck as it does when the temperature drops, and then gave. The house greeted me with the low, steady hum it has kept since '98, when the new furnace made us feel briefly rich. Tamsin met me in the foyer with a smile stretched thin enough to see daylight through. "We've been busy," she said. "You'll be pleased, I think. We've cleared some space in the garage, so much nicer when things are streamlined." She said streamlined the way catalogs say it, like the word itself could do the work. "I appreciate industriousness," I said, and hung up my scarf on the old bentwood hook Maris found at a yard sale. The summer we ruined 2 ferns and pretended we meant to. She breezed past the scent of grapefruit on her sleeve. "We're so close," she called toward the kitchen, not to me. "Just a few more tweaks." I didn't follow the voice. I stood in the hallway where the light always falls dim in winter, and looked at the blank space by the living room arch. The carpet held a clean oval depression where the chair had rested for years, as honest as a footprint. A faint draft slipped along the baseboard and crossed my ankle like a small curious animal. I rested my hand on the door frame and let the cold rise from the floor. The house was telling me a thing had moved, and things that move seldom stop on their own. Late Wednesday, the house smelled like a holiday catalog steam. From the potatoes fogging the window over the sink, cinnamon sighing off a cooling pie. I wasn't trying to listen. I was carrying in salt from the porch before the storm hit. But Tamsin's laugh lifted over the kettle and snagged me in the doorway. The cheaper the better, he won't know the difference, she told whoever was on the other end. Voice pitched bright and confidential like gossip disguised as charity. On the counter, a fanned stack of brochures caught the light. Affordable Comfort Senior Living printed in proud blue across glossy photos of beige lounges and synthetic geraniums. I kept moving as if I belonged to the room, set the salt by the stove, wiped a ring of condensation with my sleeve. Beside the brochures lay a credit card bill with the due date scolded in red past due boxed interest warning, underlined hard enough to dent the paper. A receipt for seasonal decor peeked from beneath it, glitter still clinging to the edge. Tamsin turned away from me, hip braced against the counter, twirling the phone cord between two fingers as if it were ribbon. Driving distance, she said. Rowan works in town, you know that. And it's not forever, just simpler. Her reflection in the microwave door smiled at something I couldn't hear. Rowan drifted through the doorway with a roll of butcher's paper and didn't meet my eyes. He touched the small of her back lightly, a habit he had, when he wanted to show he was present even when he wasn't participating. We'll figure it out, he murmured to her, or to himself. I rinsed my hands in hot water and let the sting steady me. You learn after enough audits to read a scene the way you read a ledger, not for what it says, but for what the numbers force to be true. Potatoes boil when someone turns the burner. Brochures don't arrive unless requested. Bills don't glow red without pressure upstream. I dried my hands on a towel that used to live on a different hook and walked out as if I had remembered something in the car. The hallway felt cooler than it should. The oval in the carpet where Maris's chair had kept its vigil looked a shade darker, like the outline of a body after the stretcher's gone. I pulled on my coat and stepped into the garage. The door creaked with that long complaining note wood makes when it wants to be left alone. The first heavy flakes were ticking against the small window. The light they made was the particular gray of a winter afternoon, about to give up and become evening. There in the corner was the chair angled wrong sullen hem of its slipcover brushing a rake handle. I crossed the concrete, felt the cold climb through my soles, and set the chair straight out of reflex, the way you smooth a collar before a photo. The scuff on the arm seemed deeper in this light. I took my phone out, framed the shot with the stacked boxes of autumn decor in the background, and tapped. One photo, then another with the timestamp superimposed, then a slow pan of the whole space, the cleared rectangle on the floor. Where something else had been, the path someone had made from the house door to the corner, efficient and thoughtless. Back inside, I set the phone on the desk blotter and typed. Subject garage. 3 attachments. A short line for context that didn't accuse and didn't apologize. Moved chair. Brochures on counter. Bill late. I hit send. The radiator hissed. The window ticked as snow fattened on the sill. I rubbed my thumb along the edge of the desk until the wood warmed under it. Harlan's reply landed before I'd stood up from the chair. Don't provoke. Let them step over the line themselves. No sermon, no strategy white paper. Just the sentence a man writes when he's already argued this case 100 times and learned what makes juries lean forward. I breathed out through my nose and nodded at the screen as if he could see me. I put the phone in my pocket, the contract's weight a steady rectangle at my ribs. From the kitchen, Tamsin's voice floated back through the hall sugar over steel. Just until after Thanksgiving, then, we'll make the switch. The pie pan pinged as it cooled. A draft slid along the baseboard and touched my ankle. I stood very still and let the house tell me what moved next. Dessert plates still clinked in the sink when Tamsin reached for mine and didn't let go. Your room's locked, sleep in the garage tonight. It's warmer there. Her voice was clean as a glass rim, the kind of tone that expects a nod. Rowan took a half step toward me, then stopped like a man who's spotted a crack in the ice and decided the fish can wait. I set my fork down. The room seemed to tilt a degree. All right, I said, as if she'd suggested a different brand of napkins. No one likes a scene on a holiday. Scenes have a way of staining. She pressed a folded blanket into my arms and steered me toward the side door with the choreography of a hostess. In the hallway mirror, we looked like a tableau, her and Control Me, accommodating the decorations behind us, pretending to be part of the solution. The latch clicked. A seam of cold unzipped the space between us. I stepped out. At 9:30, the street was a row of parked silhouettes exhaling pale smoke. My breath plumed and drifted. The garage door gave its long bored groan, and a smell of gasoline and cold rubber came up like a greeting from an old acquaintance. I switched on the small chain-pull bulb. Its cone of light made islands the workbench a stack of boxes labeled Autumn, and in the corner, Maris's chair, waiting as if it had arrived before me and saved a seat. I set the blanket on the fold-out cot and dragged the chair beside it. The scrape of its feet on concrete sounded like chalk on slate. In my pocket, the folder's corner dug into my ribs. When I touched it, the edge felt soft and dented from the clench of my hand. Paper looks unbreakable until you see where it bends. Cal. The garage door eased open a foot, and Silas Keene stuck his head in Capaskew cheeks, ruddied by the cold. You got that fine-tooth saw, Gideon's railing fell half apart. His voice trailed when he took in the cot, the blanket, the chair. You squatting out here, house is full, I said mildly. I'll sleep better without the parade. I passed him the saw from the pegboard. His eyes lingered on the chair, then the cot. He nodded once slow, like a man committing a number to memory, and slipped back out. A minute later, tires hissed at the curb. Opal Hennessy hustled up the drive with a small package hugged to her chest. Sorry it's late, she puffed, then stopped short. Oh. Her eyebrows climbed. Banned from your own house on Thanksgiving? The words came out louder than either of us intended. They hung in the cold like a banner. Temporary accommodations, I said, and smiled with my mouth, not my eyes. She looked at the closed side door, then at me as if triangulating a story that would need to be told right. Well, she said, handing me the package. I hope the garage appreciates your company. She pivoted on sensible heels and clattered away her breath, making quick little engines in the air. I unfolded the cot. The metal joints popped like knuckles. The canvas sag had the exact give of an apology you don't believe. I laid the blanket down and put Maris's chair where my hand would find it in the dark. The cushion knew the shape of my shoulder. I could almost hear her say, There, that's better. From the house, music rose and fell. The polite laughter of people who've already put on their coats. I took out my phone and shot the door handle locked clearly. Then the cot, the chair, the bulb, and its chain, the thermometer, tacked to the stud at 41 degrees. Each time the timestamp etched itself into the corner like a notary seal. My breath fogged the frame. I wiped it with my sleeve. For a moment, I stood still and listened to the garage talk, the little clicks of cooling metal, the hum of a freezer we'd meant to defrost, the faint burble of the furnace line through the wall. Quiet, measurable facts, the kind a man can hold, even when his family slips the words out from under him. Inside the jacket, my fingers found the folder again and mapped the new crease. I pictured Harlan's neat hand the way he underlines only once. I opened the email app, attached the photos, and typed a subject line that didn't need dressing up. It happened. Then I hit send and watched the small paper airplane lift and vanish into the warm dark of the house. Harlan arrived before the coffee found its courage. He stepped through the side door with a boot tap that knocked loose a lace of snow and set his briefcase on the chair across from mine. Sun made hard diamonds of the snowbank outside the kitchen window. Inside, the refrigerator hummed its thin, steady line like a tuning fork that never stops. You look rested, he said, which was his way of noting I looked anything but. I slept, I said. The cot did not. He opened the briefcase with 2 clicks that sounded like the start of something official and lifted out the contract, its corner newly folded, from spending the night close to my ribs. He smoothed it once on the table with the flat of his hand, as if it were a map, and we were about to drive it. Let's be precise, he said, and read the clause aloud. The words sounded exactly as they had in his office, dry, careful, built to withstand weather. When he reached the sentence about material interference with dignity and peaceful occupancy, he looked up and met my eye. This is that, he said simply, then went back to the page. Footsteps at the arch. Rowan, first color gone, a mug in his hand he'd forgotten to bring to his mouth. Behind him, Tamsin, lips pressed into a polite line that didn't know what to do with itself. "What's all this?" she asked, as if we were rearranging placemats. Harlan didn't answer her. He set the contract where the light fell true and gestured with 2 fingers. "Mr. Merrick," he said in that courtroom plainness of his, "your evidence." I slid across my phone. He paged through the photos, the locked doorknob, the cot and blanket, the thermometer tacked low on the stud, the timestamp stamped clean in each corner. Next, he read my short notes about Silas's visit for the Saw Opal's late package, and remarked the names of the Esh-ors who'd waved from the sidewalk, and then slowed to look again. "Witnesses," he said, not asking, just placing the piece on the board. "We can get their statements by afternoon." Tamsin found her voice. "This is ridiculous," she said, brightening the vowels the way people do when they need light without heat. "No one evicted anyone. We were reorganizing. He prefers the garage sometimes, don't you?" "Calvin, I prefer to sleep in my own bed," I said. The coffee suddenly tasted metallic. Harlan slid a single sheet from the briefcase, the one he keeps for this moment. "Per the terms you signed, Mrs. Merrick," he said evenly. "Material violation triggers automatic reversion. It doesn't require argument. It requires notice." He tapped the clause. "Notice is hereby given." "What are you talking about?" she said. But her focus had shifted past the paper to the briefcase, to the authority of a man who has brought his own furniture to the conversation. Rowan took another step into the room. "Tamsin," he said very quietly. Let him finish. Harlan did not do theater. He checked that the copy I would retain bore the right signatures, then handed me my pen. The nib slid over the page with a smooth whisper. I signed the notice, then initialed the margins, where he'd flagged them with neat yellow squares. He countersigned. The 2 pages lay side by side like a pair of skis parallel meant to go forward. "Now," he said, closing the contract folder, "the second part." He nodded toward the flyer I'd left on the counter, Brattleboro Land Trust. "Quick close options for historic properties." "You said a mail carrier left that yesterday." I dialed the number in the corner. A woman named Elise answered with the bright tempo of someone who believes good things can happen before lunch. Harlan took the call on speaker, introduced himself and me, and stated the situation in 3 sentences that turned a month of air into a morning of facts. We sent photos of the property, the square footage, the notes from last year's appraisal. I watched the second hand on the kitchen clock step from 12 to 3 to 6. The sun knifed brighter off the snow and made the room look newly washed. My phone chimed. Offer received. A second chime. Offer accepted. Harlan's mouth made a small shape of satisfaction that almost but not quite resembled a smile. "Purchase and sale agreement by 2. Elise said through the speaker paper, flapping faintly on her end. "We can open escrow immediately after signatures." 2 is good, I said. "I'll be here." We ended the call. The quiet came back, the hum of the fridge, and the distant muffled shushing of a plow on the street. Tamsin had gone very still, as if someone had said, "Don't frighten the bird." Then she found a higher shelf for her voice. "You can't do this," she said, each word distinct, as if she were placing cutlery exactly on a placemat. "You cannot just sell this house." Harlan turned his head not unkindly. He already has. It landed first in her jaw, then down her throat like a swallow that didn't go right. Color left, then returned in a blotch. She looked to Rowan, who was looking at the table as if numbers might appear and tell him what to do. I could feel the old floor under us steady itself, as if some long strain in its planks had found a new root. Harlan gathered the copies, clipped them with that little silver clip he likes, and slid my set back across the wood. "I'll have a courier pick up statements from your neighbors this afternoon," he said. "Elise will email the P&S in an hour. We'll sign an open escrow. I'll also draft a short-term occupancy agreement, 60 days, to give them time to relocate. It's neighborly, and it reads well." My phone pinged again, P&S, sent. Another ping, escrow account set up, confirmation pending. The ding made a bright point in the air and then was gone. "I'll need the study," Tamsin said, suddenly brittle. "I have calls. You'll have it," I said, "for 60 days. She stared at me for a beat, as if translating, then turned and climbed the stairs. Phone already lifted, her words shrinking as she took them higher. Hi. Yes, now. Rowan stayed where he was, pale as the plate he carried on. Eyes on the neat stack of papers that had changed the shape of our lives while the coffee was still warm. I listened to her footsteps recede above us, the whisper of carpet under a heel, and waited to hear what would echo back. By Monday, the sentence had walked itself up and down Main Street like a well-dressed rumor. Calvin sold the place the very next day. Silas repeated it at the hardware counter, Opal folded it into her postal route, and Eloise tucked it between pies and prayer requests. News here moves on feet. It wears coats and pauses to hold doors. I felt it in the nods I got when I stepped onto the porch to brush last night's powder from the railing. The snow came away in a clean sheet. Beneath, the woods smelled faintly of cold sap and old varnish. Inside, I'd set the living room back the way my hands remembered it. Maris's chair in its corner where the light in late afternoon warms the fabric to a memory. The framed photo of Rowan with the red sled level at last. I'd rubbed the floors with lemon oil until the grain lifted like it was breathing again. The scent held in the air, part citrus, part furniture shop, a reliable smell that says someone cared enough to polish what they didn't have to. At 10, Harlan knocked his two-knock rhythm and let himself in. He had the look of a man who has carried good news in a briefcase long enough to know not to rush its opening. We sat at the table again, papers squared in the pool of winter sun. 60-day occupancy agreement, he said, sliding the top sheet toward me. Dates, terms, a clause about ordinary wear. Neighborly, complete. I read and initialed where the small yellow flags asked. The pen left a wet line that shone a heartbeat before it turned matte. He watched me sign my name and notched the corner of the page, with a little silver clip, his version of a blessing. Rowan came in then, hat in his hands, hair flattened where it had kept his head warm, and his thoughts apparently cooler than they'd been. He looked at the room, then at the papers, then at me. So, he said, and that one word dragged a bucket of water behind it. He sat without being asked. Tamsin hovered at the doorway, the practiced smile she uses for photographs fixed but empty. She nodded once when Harlan greeted her as if civility were a toll she was willing to pay in exact change. We'll need your signatures, Harlan said. It gives you both until the end of January. Plenty of time to land somewhere you want to be. He said it with no irony. He never says a thing he doesn't mean. Tamsin signed with small, precise motions, lips, compressed eyes on the line, as if the ink might misbehave if not watched. Rowan held the pen, then set it down, then picked it up again. He began and stopped. He met my eyes for the first time in what felt like a long winter. I was a coward, he said, the word coming out exactly like a nail-driven true. I should have stopped it. I should have said no. I kept my voice level. Still time to fix that. He nodded, swallowed, and signed. When they were done, Harlan gathered the pages with his magician's neatness and slipped them into the case. I'll file digital copies, he said, and bring hard ones tomorrow. He stood, and with that small movement, the room felt less like a courtroom and more like a place where people could sit without choosing sides. Anything else while I'm here? Yes, I said. The will, I had drafted notes the night before, dates and amounts in my tidy numbers, but the words that mattered were plain. Maris Merrick Fund Saint. Albans winter meals and grants for elders dealing with. I paused over the phrase and wrote it out, financial mistreatment by family. No euphemisms. Harlan read over my shoulder and made a small sound that lives between approval and sorrow. We'll keep the language clean, he said. Purpose, governance, disbursement. You'll choose 2 co-trustees, Eloise, I said, and watched his eyebrows lift. She's been keeping the street fed longer than any of us. And Reverend Holloway if he'll take on one more thing. The Reverend had told me yesterday after service that the winter food fund was thin. He said it softly without petition, the way you say the temperature, not a complaint, a condition. I'd nodded then with no plan. Now the plan sat in my hand in black ink. We drafted the codicil. The pen moved, the ink shone. The lemon polish rose again as I leaned forward. In the distance, the church bells muffled themselves through the snow, 1, 2, 3, a slow counting that made the day feel reckoned. Harlan dated and signed as witness. We'll notarize this afternoon, he said. No need to leave it to chance. Neighbors trickled through the day with the kinds of congratulations small towns practice a loaf of bread left in a paper bag. A hand on a shoulder that squeezes once the sentence, "Good for you," delivered at the exact volume that tells you it means, "We saw." Eloise came with rolls and said only, "I always liked that chair there," and looked at it until the past and present matched. Tamsin kept to emails and the phone. Her voice sweetened to the point of syrup. When she booked showings and asked about deposits, she avoided my eyes the way you avoid ice you know is thin. Rowan stayed nearby as if proximity could pay off a portion of his debt. He fetched boxes and labeled them with big square letters, a man switching from passive tense to active one item at a time. Near dusk, the sky went to pewter, and the porch light blinked on to a world of sifted gray. Harlan's phone chimed. He glanced down, then forwarded the message to me. Our conversation pinged, and the subject line appeared without flourish. Merrick, Merrick Council Intro. Tamsin's lawyer's email CC'd both of us and promised swift review of recent developments. Harlan typed only 2 words above it and hit send. When I opened the note on my screen, his addendum sat there like a small, steady hand on my back. We're ready. On move-out day, Rowan came to the porch carrying a small cardboard box like it might break if he breathed on it. "For you," he said. Inside were Maris's photo albums, the brown one with the torn corner, the blue one we bought at the drugstore when film still came back in paper sleeves. The porch light caught the old plastic covers and made them shine as if the pictures underneath had just been taken. He didn't ask to come in, he didn't have to. I set the box on the hall table and touched the spine of the first album with my thumb, the way you touch a book you already know by heart. "Thank you," I said, and he nodded as if permission had been granted for something that didn't have a name yet. That night, the parish hall at St. Albans held more light than seemed possible. Strings of bulbs draped from beam to beam, candles puddled wax into saucers. The serving tables drew 2 long commas across the room. The door swung and sighed, letting in ribbons of cold that curled around our ankles before melting into the crowd. BBQ smoked from the kitchen pass. Pumpkin pie and nutmeg braided themselves into the air. Cups clicked against saucers. Someone tuned a guitar against the clatter of folding chairs. On a low platform near the front, they'd set Maris's chair borrowed just for the night beside a small table covered in white linen. I put my palm to the chair back and felt the smoothness our hands had made over years. People came by and touched it lightly, the way you touch a saint's reliquary or the edge of a quilt your grandmother sewed. She used to sit there during Advent, Eloise said, and the memory lifted into the warm air and took its place among the lights. Reverend Holloway gave a welcome that sounded like a benediction without needing the words. Then he stepped aside, and I stood with the microphone that always feels heavier than it looks. "Thank you," I began. And the room quieted the way rooms do when everyone already knows the story and is waiting to hear its ending said out loud. I told them the fund's name, the shape of its purpose. The work we do first, meals through February. Emergency fuel cards, small grants to seniors who find themselves at the rough end of a family ledger they didn't write. Harlan stood off to the side. Arms folded, the faintest smile cut into one corner of his mouth. When I reached the part about dignity, how it is not a luxury, but a floor, my voice found the steadiness it had been trying to grow back. Elise from the Land Trust brought the papers in a brown envelope, and we set them on the linen. The pen moved and left a clean trail. Harlan witnessed the Reverend added his name where governance required. Eloise dabbed at her eyes with a napkin she pretended was for BBQ sauce. When we finished, the applause came not loud, not raucous, more like rain on a summer roof, steady, assuring the sound of a thing taking. Rowan waited until the clapping thinned. He walked up slow, a man picking his way across stones in a stream, and spoke into the space between us and the chair. "If you'll have me," he said, "I'd like to help. Boxes, deliveries, whatever needs doing. I can take the Tuesday route." His hands were empty. That seemed important. I nodded. "Tuesday's yours," I said. We shook hands the way strangers do when they are not, and he stepped back into the cluster of people who knew his middle name and the year he broke his wrist sledding. The hall carried on laughter punctured by the slap of a screen door, children racing between tables, the clink of coffee cups building a small, fragile music. Candle wax domed and slid. The guitar finally found its note. I sat in Maris's chair for a minute while no one was looking and let the wood hold me. The linen over the table sighed when a draft passed. The flames wavered and righted themselves as if rehearsing. Near the end, I stood by the parish window and watched snow wheel under the streetlight in patient spirals. The glass filmed with breath and cleared, filmed and cleared. Behind me, someone set down a tray and someone else laughed low. A door opened and the night shouldered in cold and honest and uncomplicated. I touched the albums through the cardboard, then the back of the chair, then my coat pocket, where there was no longer any need to carry paper like armor. Outside, the flakes kept choosing the ground. Inside the room, kept choosing one another. I let the quiet settle and thought without triumph and without regret that I had kept what mattered a name, a house turned outward, a place at the table where no one has to earn their chair.